and Velmet Fowl.
And away they go on the start of the 189-kilometre road race. 115 participants from 32 countries. One of the most grueling events on the Olympic calendar, and certainly one of the most spectacular. Quite fair conditions here in Moscow today for it. It's a warm day with a strong cross breeze blowing across the track as we see it here. Australia is represented by 4 competitors. Kevin Bradshaw, a 23 years old painter and decorator from Camperdown in Victoria. He was twice runner-up in the Victorian road title. In point of fact, he's carrying number 1, and the Australians leading out as we can see the cyclists go out of the main straight here at Krivlatskoye. Cyclist number 5 is Remo Sansonetti from Victoria, a 34 years old fitter and turner from Greensboro. What a sight that is. He was the Australian individual road champion in 73, 1975 and 1976. He won the Australian Team Time Trial Championship 74, 75, 76, 77, 78 and 79. And he was, of course, in the 1976 Olympic team. Australia's 3rd competitor comes from Sydney and Hurstville. He's Graham Sears, a 21 years old bike mechanic. He represented Australia in New Caledonia and in the World Championships in Holland last year. And there you can see on the screen a map of the course over Krivlatskoye here. We will be bringing you quite a few aerial shots of the scene. There is a light plane hovering overhead. It's not a steep course. The course itself measures 13.5 kilometres, and it will be 14 laps to get the 189 kilometres required. That will take approximately 4¼ hours. It's a grueling race, as I mentioned. Let's continue with the Australian representatives. As you can see, the arrow going around there, that is how the cyclists ride the course. And the 4th and final representative in the Australian team is number 11. The Australians listed in alphabetical order, and they come first, 1, 5, 7 and 11. Number 11 being Michael Wilson. He's a 21 years old plumber from Devonport in Tasmania. He was the 1979 Australian 200-kilometre road champion and is the current Australian road champion. As I said, 14 laps by 13.5 kilometres, 189 kilometres the distance, and the cyclists will be on the track for some 4¼ hours. 115 competitors from 32 nations in this spectacular event on the course at Krivlatskoye. We were, just before we came on air here, talking to the Australian manager, and he did tell us that the course was exceedingly tough. Les Dunn said that it was not a steep course insofar as hills were concerned, but there were quite a lot of hills and quite a lot of corners, making it very, very tricky indeed. So it is indeed going to be a test of fitness, good bike riding, tactics, you name it. Then we can see the cyclists getting to what I think is about the highest point on the Krivlatskoye course here, and we can see the Australians still well up with them at the moment. They did draw fairly well, the Australians. 2 were on the first row, 1 on the second and 1 on the third. So Les Dunn told me the boys were very happy with that. But of course the first stages of the race, it will be very well and truly bunched up. When and if somebody makes a breakaway, would be a fair while coming yet, I would reckon. And what a sight that is. As the cyclists come down this mountain, I guess in a way it does look unlike the Mount Panorama motor racing circuit up in Bathurst, with these steep hills, short ones. It is really going to be a test of fitness. And the 4 Australians will certainly know they've been in the race: Kevin Bradshaw, Remo Sansonetti, Graham Sears and Michael Wilson. But Remo Sansonetti, a very experienced bike rider, and I think he can be expected to perform well. Kevin Bradshaw, one of the up-and-coming cyclists in Australia, twice runner-up in the Victorian road title. We can expect him to perform well. As I said, Graham Sears from Hurstville in Sydney represented Australia in the World Championships last year in Holland, and also in New Caledonia. And Michael Wilson from Tasmania, the current Australian road champion. So 4 very good cyclists from Australia. Just some of the countries taking part in this race to give you an idea of the opposition that the Australians are facing. There are cyclists from Austria, Belgium, Brazil, Bulgaria, the Cameroon. There are some cyclists from Cuba, Ethiopia, Finland, France, Great Britain, East Germany, Holland, Hungary, Ireland, Italy, Jamaica, Lebanon, Mongolia, which is perhaps surprising, Poland, Romania, Switzerland, Somalia, Sweden, Czechoslovakia, But of course, the Russians are well represented, and I think we can expect their four to perform very well indeed. The Russians, Yuri Baranov, Yuri Kashirin, Sergei Sukharinchov, and Anatoly Yakin will certainly be up with the leaders near the finish. There's a very strong team from Yugoslavia. There are some Zimbabwe cyclists with us. The Danes will cycle well. The Venezuelans are also here, and there are two cyclists from Libya. And of course, the Italians, the current world champions, Gianni Giacomini, will also be expected to perform very, very well, the current world champion. So that's all we can tell you from the scene of the road race at the moment. The field still very bunched, as you can see. No riders yet making a breakaway. 189 kilometres the distance. It's a long way to go, expected to take some 4 1/4 hours, 14 laps of the 13.5 kilometre circuit. So we'll take this break and be back with further reports from the cycling road race a little bit later on during the day.
The strain begins to tell now as Moscow turns on its finest and warmest day of the Olympics so far, particularly for the cyclists in the 189-kilometre road race. And for a further report on that, here's Peter Landy.
Thanks very much indeed, Gary. Well, it is certainly warm, but we have a very strong breeze here on top of the hill. And there's certainly been plenty of drama so far in the race, which is early in its stages yet. For Australia, Graham Sears unfortunately collided with an Ethiopian on the first lap, Gebrawat. Gebrawat came over, Graham Sears came over the top of him. Sears came to the ground, looked badly bruised, but nevertheless got back on his machine, got it in here to the main marshalling area, got a new bike and is back in the race, but at that stage he was some 400 metres behind the main bunch. At the 9 kilometre mark, number 245, Vinko Polic of Yugoslavia broke away, but he was picked up by the main bunch again shortly afterwards. The leader at the end of the first lap was number 36, Jose Carlos Lima from Brazil. At the 6 kilometre mark of the second lap, two riders broke away, number 229, Yuri Baranov of the Soviet Union, and he was joined by number 187, Tadeusz Wojciech of Poland. However, 1 kilometre later, they were joined by the leaders, but once again, Baranov broke away. And so we've had plenty of moves, plenty of action, plenty of drama in the first few stages of this remarkable race. But the other Australians seem to be still well up with the main bunch and therefore well in contention. But just repeating the information regarding the Australian Graham Sears from Sydney, he did collide with Gebrawat of Ethiopia on the first lap. It was about the 10 kilometre mark. He came down, got back on his machine, got it in here to the marshalling area, got another bike and is back in the race. But of course it was bad luck for him, and he was at that stage about 400 metres behind the main bunch. That's all we can really tell you insofar as the leaders are concerned. It's a very, very tricky course. Just repeating the information earlier, 4 Australians in it: Kevin Bradshaw, Remo Sansonetti, Graham Sears and Michael Wilson. Sears the man to come down. It's very, very hilly. It is certainly going to test the riders out right throughout the day. The manager of the Australian team told us that he expected a time around about 4 1/4 hours, but I wouldn't be surprised if indeed it took longer. For those of you that know the Mount Panorama motor racing circuit, the terrain is a little bit like that, probably not as steep, but there are many more hills. They are not as steep as the Mount Panorama motor racing circuit, but it is certainly going to be a test of cyclists' skill, their fitness, and tactics, of course, will come into it during the later stages of the race. A couple of breakaway moves were made, as I mentioned. One of them was picked up, that was Polic of Yugoslavia. He very quickly came back to the field. Then the Soviet rider Baranov tried it at the 6 kilometre mark of the second lap, and they have yet to come past us to complete 2 laps of the circuit. The race has been in progress 35 minutes and 30 seconds, and as I mentioned, it would probably take about 4 1/4 hours to complete. The other 3 Australians, they're still well up with the main bunch. That's all we have for you from the moment at the cycling, Gary. So until we have any further news to report, it's back to you in the studio.
Okay, Peter, thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Peter. The rider on the screen at the moment is Sergei Sukharinchov of the Soviet Union. A few riders have made a breakaway group, and he is in that trio at the moment down there that you can see on screen. We're still in the 3rd lap. 44 minutes of the race have elapsed. There are 22 riders in the leading group, and one of these is an Australian, Michael Wilson from Tasmania. Wilson, as I mentioned to you in the opening of the commentary, is the 1979 Australian 200-kilometre road champion and the current Australian road champion. In this gruelling race, the Australians well up with them. The worst news we had this morning was early in the first lap when Graham Sears of Hurstville in Sydney, the 21-year-old bike mechanic from Sydney, came down in a rather spectacular spill with one of the Ethiopians. The Ethiopian, in point of fact, came down first, and the Australian then came down on top of him. But to his credit, he got back on his bike and got it back here in front of the marshalling area, and he got back on his machine, and he was doing quite well. Now, two riders coming past us here are the leaders at the moment, and we can see, just trying to pick up their numbers, Graham Sears of Australia is still in the race as far as I can gather. Let's check the leaders. Right, it's the Russian who is still out in front. There are 22 riders in the leading group. We have had one withdrawal. Number 51 is out. That's Thomas Nyameg of Cameroon. He withdrew at the 42-minute mark, but the other three Australians are still well up with the leaders. And as I mentioned, Wilson from Tasmania, the Australian road champion at the moment, is still in the leading group of riders. You can probably hear in the background it is very, very windy from where doing the commentary position. Sears, in point of fact, just checking on his position now, is 5:16 behind the leaders. So he is slowly drifting back after that bad mishap. But to his credit, he is still in the race, but the other three Australians are well up with the leaders in the bunch of 22. Michael Wilson is not too far from the lead. That's about all we have for you at the moment. The riders, as I mentioned, still in their second lap. They'll be coming down for 3 laps. It's taking around about 20 minutes a lap at the moment. But the hills here, I would think, before too much longer, will certainly be starting to take their toll of some of the riders we have in the event. 115 started, one has already dropped out. As I mentioned to you, Sears is now over 5 minutes behind the leaders. 32 nations are represented here in the 189-kilometre race here. And point of fact now, I've just been told the information that Sears is out of the race. We'll bring you further information on that as we get it available to us. In the meantime, let's go over to the pole vault and Ray Weinberg. Right, thank you very much indeed. Back here at the road race, the Soviet riders are dominating the situation at the moment. The leader is 242. That's Sergei Sukhorchenkov, and he at the moment has a good lead on the field. He leads his compatriot Yuri Baranov, number 229. In third place at the moment is Czeslaw Lang of Poland, and in fourth place is number 152, Giuseppe Petito of Italy. We did have quite a bad fall, not so very long back. Mats Gustafsson of Sweden came down. I think it was over the top of one of his teammates, just remembering back. The race in progress, just over 52.5 minutes at the moment. Repeating the news for Australian fans that we have had one withdrawal out of the race for Australia. Graham Sears, who was involved in a spill himself earlier. Sears out of the race. He was trailing by some 5 minutes and is now out of the race. But repeating the leaders, the three in screen at the moment are leading the field. That's Sergei Sukhorchenkov of the Soviet Union, Yuri Baranov of the Soviet Union, and Czeslaw Lang of Poland, followed by Giuseppe Petito of Italy. They're the first 4 leaders in the 189-kilometre road race at the moment here in Moscow. That's all the news we have for you. We'll take these messages back with more Olympic news in just a moment.
Through to the final, Australia's Rick Mitchell did extremely well.
Great.